On my birthday, instead of candles and cake, I got an eviction notice from my own family. My name is Sierra Dalton. I was in my mid-20s then, working long shifts, saving every dollar I could, trying to get through life one step at a time. I wasn't the loud or dramatic type. I was the quiet one, the dependable one, the girl who held everything together without asking for much in return. That night was supposed to be simple. Aunt Meredith told me there would be a family dinner. I came home from work, tired but hopeful. Birthdays never meant much in our house, but a small dinner together sounded nice. Instead of balloons or laughter, I found them sitting in the living room, waiting for me like judges. Uncle Franklin cleared his throat, his eyes avoiding mine. Meredith's lips were tight, like she was delivering some business deal rather than speaking to the girl she had raised. They told me I had 2 weeks to move out. My room, the one I had lived in since my parents died, was being given to Chase. Their son. My cousin. He was coming back from college, and they wanted him to have his space. For a moment, I thought it was some kind of joke. My birthday, and they were saying this? But no one laughed. Chase smirked from the corner, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. "Guess the freeloader finally has to go," he said. My chest burned, but my voice caught in my throat. I tried to remind them I was working, saving for my nursing license, paying for my own things. I tried to remind them of all the nights I had babysat Chase, cooked meals, and cleaned the house while they were gone. But Meredith cut me off, her tone colder than I'd ever heard. "You're not our responsibility anymore." The words stung worse than any slap. For years they had told me I would always have a home. I remembered being 12 years old, crying into Meredith's arms after my parents' car accident, and her whispering that I was safe with them. I believed her. That night, I realized it had all been a lie. I went to my room and started packing. My hands shook as I folded clothes and placed them into a small suitcase. Every sound of the zipper echoed in my ears. Tears blurred my vision, but I refused to let them hear me cry. I carried my things quietly to my car, my heart breaking with each step. That night, I sat in the driver's seat, surrounded by boxes of my life, parked under a lonely streetlight. My birthday ended in silence, the kind that hurt more than screaming ever could. I didn't shout at them, didn't beg, didn't curse. I just sat there, clutching the steering wheel, letting the betrayal settle into my bones. In that moment, I made myself a promise. I wouldn't fight them with words or anger. I wouldn't waste my energy trying to convince them of my worth. My revenge would be simple. I would rise. I would build myself into someone so strong, so unshakable, that their cruelty would haunt them long after I was gone. I closed my eyes and breathed. The girl they threw out like trash would not stay broken. My silence would be my weapon. My life my answer. And one day they would remember this birthday, not as the night they won, but as the night they lost me forever. I was 12 when the accident happened. One moment my parents were alive, the next they were gone, taken in a flash of twisted metal and sirens. I remember the smell of hospital disinfectant, the weight of strange adults explaining things I didn't want to hear. My whole world was ripped away, and I felt like a shadow drifting through halls that no longer belonged to me. It was Meredith, my mother's sister, who came to me that night. She wrapped her arms around me, whispering promises in my ear. "You'll always have a home here, Sierra. You're our girl now. We'll take care of you." Those words were like a rope thrown to someone drowning. I held on to them, desperate to believe. Franklin stood beside her, nodding, saying I was family now. They told me Chase would be like a brother to me. For a while, I let myself believe it. At first, things seemed normal. I had a bed, a roof, food on the table. But small cracks started to show. Chase got the biggest room, painted the way he liked. I was given the smaller one, filled with old furniture no one wanted. On Christmas mornings, his pile of gifts was always taller than mine, wrapped in shiny paper. I would get practical things, shoes that were a size too big so they'd last longer, a winter coat bought on sale. Chase got new sneakers, video games, bikes. I smiled and said thank you, because I didn't want to seem ungrateful. When school plays came around, Meredith sat in the front row for Chase, clapping the loudest. When it was my turn, she was often too busy. At family gatherings, relatives bragged about Chase's achievements. I was the quiet girl clearing plates and making sure the younger cousins stayed out of trouble. I told myself it didn't matter, that at least I had a place to stay. I swallowed the hurt because I believed I was safe. But the favoritism never stopped. Chase broke things and laughed about it, and Franklin would chuckle and call him just a boy. If I so much as spilled a glass of water, Meredith would sigh and remind me to be more careful. Chase stayed out late, and they shrugged it off. If I wanted to go to a friend's birthday party, I had to beg for permission and be home before dark. And still, I held on to the promise. Whenever I felt invisible, I replayed Meredith's words in my head. You'll always have a home here. I clung to them like a secret shield. The truth hit me slowly over the years, sharper each time. The day they made me give up my new jacket so Chase could wear it because he needed it more. The time Franklin used the money I had earned babysitting to buy Chase another video game, promising me he would pay it back, but never did. The night I overheard Meredith telling a neighbor, Sierra's not really ours. We just do what we can. Those words burned like acid. Not really theirs. Not really a daughter. Just someone they tolerated. I sat on my bed that night, hugging a pillow, and tried not to cry too loudly. Even then, I couldn't bring myself to believe they would ever cast me out. I told myself they loved me in their own way, that they were just stricter with me. But the memory of that whispered promise never left me. It echoed every time I was pushed aside, every time I was told to wait, every time Chase got what I needed. It was supposed to mean I belonged. Instead, it became a cruel reminder. By the time I stood in that living room years later, hearing Meredith say I had to leave, the betrayal wasn't just about that night. It was about every lie I had believed since I was 12. Every birthday when Chase blew out candles while I watched from the side. Every time I reminded myself I had a home, when the truth was that I was only a guest waiting to be shown the door. The pain wasn't only in being cast out. It was in realizing that the promise that had kept me alive all these years was never real. It was just words. And now I finally saw them for what they were. Lies meant to soothe a child who had already lost too much. That night felt like a storm crashing down on me. The words were already said, but the silence that followed made everything worse. 2 weeks, that was all I was given. 2 weeks to leave the only place I had called home since I was a child. I stood there, trying to make sense of it, but Chase didn't give me a chance. He leaned against the doorway with that smirk he always wore when he knew he had won. Guess the freeloader finally has to go, he said. The word stabbed deeper than I thought it could. Freeloader. As if the years of working, cleaning, cooking, and holding myself together meant nothing. I tried to explain. My voice shook, but I told them about my job at the hospital, about the late nights I spent on my feet, about the money I was putting away for my nursing license. Every dollar was stretched so thin it barely covered food and gas. I reminded them I wasn't asking for luxuries. Just time, just a place to stay until I could stand on my own. But Meredith didn't even blink. Her arms were crossed, her expression sharp as glass. You're not our responsibility anymore. The words dropped like ice water, and suddenly I couldn't breathe. She had said I was family, had promised I always had a home. Now she spoke as if I were a stranger who had overstayed my welcome. I turned to Franklin, hoping for some sign of kindness, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. His silence was louder than Chase's laughter. It told me everything I needed to know. No one was going to stand up for me. My hands trembled as I went to my room. Every step felt heavy, like I was walking into the end of something I had never imagined losing. I pulled my suitcase out from under the bed and began folding clothes, though my vision blurred with tears. The sound of the zipper echoed in the small room, sharp and final. I didn't own much. A few boxes of books, some clothes, a worn blanket that had once belonged to my mom. Each item I placed inside the suitcase felt like a goodbye. My tears fell freely now, soaking the fabric of a shirt I held too long in my hands. I wanted to scream, to demand why I was never enough, but no words came. Carrying the boxes to my car was the hardest part. The house loomed behind me, every corner filled with memories of laughter that wasn't mine, promises that were broken. Chase's mocking chuckle followed me as I stepped outside for the last time. I loaded the car with what little I had. My hands were raw, my heart heavier than all the boxes combined. By the time I shut the trunk, my cheeks were wet and cold. I slid into the driver's seat, gripping the wheel as though it could hold me together. I didn't look back at the house. My tears blurred the world, but I refused to let them see me fall apart. They had taken everything from me that night, but I still had my silence. And with it, the last piece of dignity I could carry. That first night, I had nowhere to go. My car became my shelter, parked under a lonely streetlight at the edge of town. The seat was stiff, the air cold, and the darkness pressed in on me. I pulled my mother's old blanket around my shoulders and tried to pretend it was enough. The tears came in waves, but there was no one to hear them, no one to care. I stared at the ceiling of the car, my chest heavy, my body aching with exhaustion. Every part of me wanted to shout, to drive back to that house, and demand they take me in. I wanted to scream that I was family, that I had given them everything I could. But my voice stayed locked inside me. Yelling wouldn't change who they were. Crying at their door wouldn't make them love me. So I stayed silent. Somewhere in that silence, a fire began to burn. It wasn't loud or wild, it was steady, low, and sharp. If they thought they could throw me away like nothing, I would prove them wrong. I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me broken. I would not beg. I would not fight in the way they expected. My revenge would be different. I would build myself piece by piece, quietly, until one day they would have to face what they had lost. They would remember the girl they cast out and see the woman who rose from it. I wouldn't need to shout or throw their cruelty back in their faces. My life itself would be the answer. As the night dragged on, the silence grew heavier, but I began to understand it. Silence wasn't weakness. It was control. It was power. Every word I didn't waste on them became fuel I could use for myself. I closed my eyes and gripped the blanket tighter. The car was small, the air damp, and I felt invisible to the world, but inside, something had shifted. I had made a vow no one heard but me. One day, I promised myself, they would regret what they had done. And when that day came, I wouldn't need to say a single word. The basement room smelled faintly of dust and old books, but it was warm, and it was mine. Mrs. Harlow, the widow who rented it to me, greeted me with soft eyes and gentle words. She was older, her hair white and her hands lined with years of work, but there was something steady and kind about her. She didn't ask questions I didn't want to answer. She simply showed me the room, gave me a set of keys, and said, "You're safe here." Safe. It had been so long since I'd felt that. The room was small, just a bed, a dresser, and a single lamp, but I treated it like a palace. I laid out my few belongings carefully, like they mattered. Every night when I came back, tired and sore, the quiet hum of that basement reminded me I still had a place to lay my head. My days were filled with work. At sunrise, I was at the hospital, dressed in scrubs, moving quickly down halls that always smelled of antiseptic. I wasn't a nurse yet, but as an aide I learned everything I could. I helped patients bathe, changed sheets, carried trays, and stood by doctors and nurses who barely noticed me. It didn't matter. I was watching, learning, storing every piece of knowledge away for later. When my hospital shift ended, I changed uniforms and hurried to the diner. There, the smell of grease and coffee clung to me until my skin ached. I balanced plates, smiled at strangers, refilled mugs until my arms felt like they would fall off. Tips were small, but they added up. Every dollar mattered. Some nights, I stumbled into the basement room with my feet blistered, my hands raw, and my body begging for rest. But even then, I counted the money I had earned, folded it carefully, and set a little aside for my nursing license. That dream was the rope pulling me forward. Every insult from Chase, every cold look from Meredith, every broken promise, they all became fuel. Each cruel word whispered in my memory made me grip my future tighter. I didn't tell anyone what had happened. When people asked about my family, I gave short answers and changed the subject. The truth was too raw, too humiliating to share. Besides, it wasn't their burden to carry. My pain became my secret, folded neatly inside me, sealed with silence. Mrs. Harlow sometimes noticed the exhaustion in my eyes. She'd offer me a cup of tea or a plate of leftovers. "You remind me of myself when I was young," she'd say softly, placing food in front of me without expecting thanks. Her kindness was a balm I hadn't known I needed. In her house, for the first time, I felt like someone saw me without judgment. Life was not easy. My back ached, my savings grew slowly, and my nights were long. But every morning, when I opened my eyes in that little basement, I reminded myself, this was the road forward. And I would walk it in silence, step by step, until I reached the life they never believed I could have. The hospital was always busy, alarms beeping, nurses rushing, patients calling out, but I found a strange comfort in the routine. I moved quickly, doing my work without complaint, keeping my head down. Most people barely noticed me, and that was fine. I wasn't there for recognition. I was there to learn. One afternoon, while I was helping an older patient settle into bed, a man in a white coat stopped at the doorway. He watched quietly as I adjusted the blankets and spoke softly to calm the patient's nerves. When I finished, he stepped forward and introduced himself as Dr. Mason Clark, a visiting physician. His voice was calm, but his eyes were sharp, like he was studying me in a way most people never did. Over the next few days, he seemed to notice me often. He asked questions, not just about the patients, but about me. When I mentioned I wanted to become a nurse, he didn't laugh or brush me off the way others sometimes had. Instead, he nodded thoughtfully and asked what was holding me back. I told him the truth: money. School was expensive, and I was barely keeping myself afloat with rent and bills. Dr. Clark didn't pity me. He gave me information. He told me about scholarships, grants, and programs I had never heard of. He encouraged me to apply, promising that hard work and determination could open doors I thought were closed forever. For the first time, I felt like someone believed in me without hesitation. With his guidance, I filled out forms late at night after finishing shifts at the diner. I wrote essays, gathered recommendations, and pushed through my doubts. Weeks later, I received the letter. I had been awarded a scholarship. My hands shook as I held it, the words blurring through my tears. Nursing school was no longer a dream. It was possible. Balancing school and work was harder than anything I had ever done. I attended classes full-time, soaking up knowledge with every lecture, every lab, every clinical rotation. Then I worked part-time shifts to keep myself afloat. My days blurred into long hours, my nights into study sessions lit by a single lamp in the basement room. But something inside me was changing. The girl who once cried in her car on her birthday was slowly fading. In her place was someone stronger, someone who carried purpose in her steps. I no longer felt invisible. Each test I passed, each patient I helped, each skill I mastered built me into more than I had been before. I didn't tell my family about any of it. They didn't deserve to know. My progress, my victories, those were mine alone. For the first time in my life, I felt the ground steady beneath me. And as I walked across the campus with my books in hand, I realized I was no longer the unwanted girl. I was becoming the woman I was always meant to be. The years slipped by faster than I expected. Long nights of studying and endless hours of work finally paid off the day I passed my RN exam. I held the license in my hands, the letters shining back at me, and felt a quiet strength spread through my chest. I had earned it. Nobody could take it from me. With that license, new doors opened. I was offered a full-time position at the hospital with a salary that once felt impossible to imagine. The first paycheck brought me to tears. For so long, I had scraped by, counting every dollar, skipping meals to make rent. Now I could pay my bills and still have money left over. I didn't waste it, though. Every bit I didn't need went straight into savings. Mrs. Harlow noticed my careful habits. One evening, over a cup of tea, she began sharing her wisdom. Her late husband had left her with properties she managed on her own, and she taught me about investing. She showed me how to spot opportunities, how to calculate risks, and how patience could grow money into something lasting. At first, the numbers overwhelmed me, but with her guidance I learned. When I was ready, I bought my first small property. It wasn't much, just an old duplex that needed work, but it was mine. I kept living simply, fixing it up slowly, and renting it out. Every time the rent check came in, I thought about the nights I'd gone hungry and smiled. Piece by piece, I built a future stronger than anything my family thought I could ever have. Life settled into something steady. I worked at the hospital, respected for my skill and kindness with patients. I owned more than one property now, thanks to Mrs. Harlow's advice and my discipline. My bank account grew, but I never flaunted it. I still preferred quiet evenings, books, and the comfort of knowing I didn't owe anyone anything. Through it all, I never once reached out to Meredith, Franklin, or Chase. They had made their choice, and I had made mine. But news has a way of traveling. I heard whispers from old neighbors and acquaintances. Franklin had lost his job. Meredith's spending habits had caught up with them. Chase never quite lived up to the promise they bragged about for years. Debt piled on them like a weight they couldn't shake. I didn't celebrate their troubles, but I didn't feel pity either. Their downfall wasn't my doing. It was the path they had carved for themselves. I only kept moving forward, quietly, steadily, without needing to remind them of the girl they had thrown away. My life had blossomed in silence, away from their cruelty. I had stability, respect, and independence, all built with my own hands. And in that quiet success, I found peace they could never take from me. One afternoon, while finishing paperwork at the hospital, I received a call from a realtor I knew through Mrs. Harlow. He mentioned a property coming up for foreclosure and thought I might be interested. At first, I wasn't. I had enough to manage already. But when he read out the address, my heart stopped. It was Meredith and Franklin's house, the same house I had been forced to leave years ago. I sat in silence, the phone pressed to my ear, memories flooding back. The birthday night, the packed bags, the drive to nowhere, it was all tied to that address. I asked the realtor for details. He explained the bank was seizing it because the owners had fallen behind on payments. It would go up for auction soon, and investors were already circling. I didn't tell him my connection to the house. I simply said I was interested. In the days that followed, I thought hard about what it would mean. Part of me wondered if buying it was too much, if it would drag me backward into old wounds. But another part of me knew this wasn't about holding on to pain. It was about closing a circle. They had handed me an eviction notice without hesitation. Now life had placed the power in my hands. When the auction came, I placed my bid quietly with steady hands. On paper, I was just another investor, nothing personal, nothing emotional. The process was over quickly. I signed the documents, and just like that, the house was mine. I never contacted them, never gloated, never explained. The bank's paperwork did all the talking. They were told they had to leave, the same way they once told me. I imagined Meredith's face as she read the notice, Franklin's silence heavy in the room, Chase's anger spilling out with no place to land. For once, they were the ones packing boxes, deciding what they could carry and what had to be left behind. I didn't drive by or watch them move out. I didn't need to. The knowledge was enough. Their home, the place where I had felt both sheltered and betrayed, now belonged to me. But unlike them, I had no desire to throw anyone out with cruelty or mockery. I simply let the process unfold as it was written in law. The same way they had once turned me out, I now legally held their home in silence. It wasn't revenge with fire or fury. It was calm, steady, undeniable. I didn't shout or celebrate. I just signed the papers, kept the keys, and walked away knowing the tables had turned completely. The girl who had slept in her car now owned the house that had rejected her. And no one, not even Meredith or Franklin, could erase that truth. It happened on an ordinary afternoon in town. I had just finished a shift at the hospital and stopped at a small cafe to pick up coffee. I was dressed in my scrubs, hair tied back, ID badge clipped to my pocket. I felt steady, confident, more myself than I ever had before. As I walked out with my cup, I almost collided with a group on the sidewalk. When I looked up, my breath caught. Meredith, Franklin, and Chase stood there. For a moment, none of us moved. Their eyes scanned me from head to toe, as if they couldn't quite believe what they were seeing. It was Franklin who shifted uncomfortably first, glancing away like he wasn't sure whether to acknowledge me. Meredith's expression tightened, her lips parting slightly, as though words had failed her. And then there was Chase, his smirk still the same, though I could see the years hadn't been kind to him. "Well, look who it is," Chase said, his tone sharp with mockery. "Still scraping by? Or are you bussing tables somewhere in that outfit?" I didn't rise to it. His words no longer carried the power they once did. I met his eyes calmly and took a slow sip of coffee before answering. "Actually, I've just bought a house," I said. My voice was steady, not boastful, just matter of fact. That silenced him for a moment. Franklin's eyes flicked up in surprise, and Meredith's face paled slightly. She studied me carefully, as if piecing together a puzzle she didn't want to finish. "I've been working hard," I added simply, adjusting the strap of my bag. "Things are good." I didn't say more. I didn't need to. Their expressions told me enough. Chase's smirk faltered, though he quickly forced it back on his face. "Good for you," he muttered, but the bite in his words was weak now, almost hollow. Meredith's eyes lingered on me the longest. I could see the calculations behind them, the doubt twisting into realization. She didn't ask which house. She didn't have to. A small, uneasy silence grew between us, one that pressed heavier with each passing second. I gave them a polite nod and stepped past, leaving them standing on the sidewalk. I didn't look back. My heart was calm, my step steady. For the first time, I had faced them on equal ground and walked away stronger. The house sat quiet when I pulled into the driveway. The paint was chipped, the lawn overgrown, but the shape of it was burned into my memory. For a long moment, I just sat in my car, staring at the front door I had once walked through with hope, only to be cast out years later. Now the keys were in my pocket. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The air smelled different, stale and empty, but the walls still carried echoes of the past. I walked slowly from room to room, letting the memories rise. The living room where I had blown out a handful of birthday candles as a child. The kitchen where I had cooked dinner while everyone else laughed in another room. The hallway where I had carried boxes on the night they told me to leave. I paused in my old bedroom. The space was bare now, only faint marks on the walls where furniture once stood. I remembered packing my suitcase there with shaking hands, trying not to sob too loudly. Standing in that same room, I felt the weight of that night, but also how far I had come since then. The house was silent, and so was I. I didn't come to celebrate or mock. I didn't need to shout, "Look at me now." The truth was already written into every step I took across the floorboards. They had lost the home they once valued more than me, and now it belonged to the girl they thought would never survive without them. I wandered upstairs, running my hand lightly along the railing. The silence pressed around me, but it no longer hurt. It was peaceful, like the closing of a book. I wasn't that frightened, abandoned girl anymore. I was a woman who had built her own life, brick by brick, without asking them for anything. In the kitchen, I stood for a long while, listening to nothing but the hum of the empty space. I thought of Chase's cruel laughter, Meredith's cold words, Franklin's silence. For years, they had been the loudest voices in my head. But here, in their absence, I realized their power was gone. What remained was mine. I walked back to the front door and looked out at the yard one last time. There was no triumph in my chest, no fire of revenge burning hot. Only a calm certainty. I didn't need them to see me succeed. I didn't need to rub their downfall in their faces. My silence was enough. As I locked the door behind me and slid the keys back into my pocket, the thought settled in me like a final line written across my story. They threw me out on my birthday, and years later, I evicted them back, without ever raising my voice. Do you think Sierra did the right thing by staying silent and building her own life, or should she have tried to forgive her family? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories.